Welcome to my show. I'm a guest here. Her name is Ufoma Otu. Mrs. Ufoma, how are you doing, ma?
I'm doing great. How are you today?
I'm fine. Thank you very much, Mrs. Ufoma. And also, thank you so much for the time and the opportunity. Firstly, you are an author. You're also a coach and the founder of the Leading Soul Global Platform. Can you please, Mrs. Ufoma, discuss more about yourself and how you are doing currently now, Mrs. Ufoma?
Well, yes, let me just start off by saying thank you so much for having me on. I hope this is a very fruitful, encouraging conversation that is of value to your subscribers, your viewers, and mine as well. I came in here with that intention, and yeah, I hope that we're all elevated in the simplest and the best of ways. And so it is. So, by way of background, I started off my career in public relations, communications, worked in various industries, and before making my segue into project management, and was fortunate to work with different members of the C-suite in various capacities, from marketing communications, PR, again, project management, Scrum, etc., and saw the best parts of leadership and the worst part of leadership. And so that informs this decision to parlay that experience into a platform that addresses leadership as a whole, as a continuum, beyond skills, beyond position, beyond title, beyond leadership as a signifier of status, to the leader as the entire person, body, mind, soul, spirit, and how that impacts the way they lead and do, how they do it right, and to be able to now translate that, to doing so with others. So hence the name Leading Soul. And we're a platform, an online publishing team that publishes, obviously, YouTube content. The Leading Soul platform itself has blog posts, free resources, books, audiobooks, journals, guides, etc. And we just launched Substack as well, where we take each component of our key buckets: mindfulness, emotional intelligence, spirituality, and take it a step further and work leaders through those buckets each week and just guide them during their journey. So the objective is not to be perfect. No such thing exists, especially when you're talking about leadership. Most leadership conversations focus on influence, strategy, managing, and performance, and for good reasons, right? Because you're trying to advance outcomes that are foundational to results, good results, are all foundational um, in terms of rethinking leadership, not as a title or a position or even a status signifier, but as an intentional practice of leading oneself consciously before then trying to lead others effectively.
Shows that the leading soul global platform shows a very huge role when it comes to leadership because leadership requires a lot of specific tasks. It requires a lot of areas one need to actually focus on and also some areas one need to actually build upon as well. Which is why I would like to drive to yourself personally if you've written any book from the experience you've had, or if you are planning to write any book in the coming future. This is Ufoma.
Almost daily about this particular topic through blog posts, through like as I mentioned earlier, the YouTube channel, and indeed I have written a book. My first book, full length, if you will, was on leadership. It's titled "Lead You," and it's being re-released later this year, late August, early September. And even though that book focuses more on young Africans and young at heart Africans, in terms of being catalysts for change in leadership, there are definitely, nuggets, golden nuggets that I borrowed from there to launch Leading Soul, the Leading Soul platform. And I plan to write, continue to write more content about this because I think it's important. Again, most leadership outlets out there, focus on leadership from those perspectives I mentioned earlier: the strategy, the performance, the skills, all great. But this niche adds an important component to the conversation because it's not only useful even in the workplace or community groups, it's needed, it's critical in family groups, dynamics, and the list goes on. Anywhere where there are interpersonal dynamics occurring, acknowledging and implementing these suggestions can only make for a fuller, richer, more wholesome experience. And I say that more from a wholeness perspective, not wholesome as in, you know, um, morally judging anybody, but for, to the extent that the individual is more whole in terms of their interactions. That makes for a richer, fuller life. No question.
More in point of Africans and how one can actually build on in perspective of what you've learned in recent years as well. I would also like to drive to the point of spiritual growth because spiritual growth could actually play a very huge role when it comes to performance and also actually wanting to work towards pressure as well. So, from the experience you've had, Mrs. Ufoma, why do you think spiritual growth is so important for leaders who want to stay clear, steady, and aligned in a world that constantly pulls them towards pressure, performance, and distraction? Mrs. Ufo,
Make leaders more whole and or make them more aligned. And people in general that are more aligned, I should say, will make decisions from that state and make it with the good, with the good of the whole in mind, not to keep playing the words there. As I hinted earlier, they won't be perfect. I mean, they're humans too. We're all humans. But they won't make the same mistakes as a leader that emphasizes ego, image, or position, right? That puts that, front and center. For example, a leader that takes time to meditate, reflect, is, just more likely to acknowledge a counterpoint of view. They're more likely to say after contemplation, uh, I could have said that better. I could have handled that better. They see the mutuality of it all. They will almost effortlessly be reciprocal with respect, right? And ironically, them being that way, or these sort of leaders, is not just pseudo spiritual mumbo jumbo. It will invariably affect how they handle pressure and how they place others under pressure. Their conduct, their example, their insightful nature, all of that will boost performance, will steady themselves, um, their team, again, their families, their communities, when countering distractions arise. So it's not mutually exclusive. It's actually practice that cements and provides a stronger foundation to leaders across the board. And that's why it's critical.
meditation. Those things actually plays a very huge role in our growth as leaders because as leaders, one could actually be in the position of pressure, which will actually drive more as well. Because those pressure actually cause a lot of distraction, a lot of things one cannot actually remember at times. And that is why when we actually give ourselves reflection, we actually breathe in with meditation. It actually plays a very huge and profound role how one can actually build on himself regarding the spiritual perspective and how one can actually build a more sustained life as well. And also, I would just like to drive from the experience you've had for people who are busy carrying responsibilities. What do you think are some of the simple spiritual practices that you think can help them stay connected to peace, wisdom, and inner clarity in daily lives? Mrs. Ufoma.
Because, while spiritual practices are wonderful and necessary, our physical responsibilities are real and they matter. So I'm not an advocate of being in a la-la world where, um, you know, we put aside our responsibilities and challenges. No, we're advocates for rising up and facing them in the physical space. And rather, I'm an advocate for the simple is best method in meditation, even if it's 5 minutes, wherever you can squeeze it in. Deep breathing, alternate nostril breathing can be quite balancing and healing. Going for a nice walk. There's a reason some people love construction. Just laying on the ground, yeah, on the floor, and raising your feet against up a wall, a chair, can sound simple, but it's very nourishing. It's very grounding. And feet massage, I'm huge on that because the feet are filled with nerve endings that are connected to different parts of the body to again to heal, to balance you physically, spiritually, and it's no coincidences that when you do these things, and these aren't the only ones; these are just examples. During such practices, ideas can seem to come to you out of nowhere. New insight, perspective can come through to your intuition, your discernment. It's heightened. Yes, it can be from, the ether or consciousness at large, because we're all conscious, right? Everything around us is conscious, but it's also from your soul. So it's important to not simply dismiss them and go on to the next, 3D concern as we are, apt to do at one moment in time or another. But here's a quick tip though. If you gloss over it, yeah, an idea comes to you, a thought comes to you, and it returns again, especially when you least expect it or were even thinking about it, it's definitely yours to explore further. As long as it doesn't blatantly harm you or others and can even open up your world further, it's safe to say for you, it's safe to try and explore it. So just a quick thought about that. But definitely simple is best. The goal is not to, complicate people's lives. People already have a lot going on. The goal is to incorporate practices that strengthen them mentally, physically, emotionally, and definitely spiritually.
Anyone in this world could face a lot of situations as we are on earth. And that is why we actually need to look for something that can actually build them stronger from within. And I'm so glad you made mention of the point of meditation, because meditation actually helps us connect ourselves through the source, make us to actually realign ourselves, understand who we are, and also generate a lot of energies right from the outside towards us, which will help us actually profoundly lead well and also make some certain decisions in the right way. And also, I would like to drive how you think everyday leaders, how you think they can stay spiritually rooted while navigating ambition, responsibilities, uncertainty, and the demands of modern life without becoming disconnected from themselves. Mrs. Ufoma.
Right. Mhm. I would say our objective, our mission is about self leadership through awareness, right? So we keep going back to that, but we also know the reality that each of us comes at life with our collection of attitudes, fears, habits, insecurities, motives that influence us, right? And hence our leadership styles. So without our conscious awareness, though, they can affect us more than we can realize. So when we make time to explore ways we can genuinely be emotionally intelligent and assess our decisions and why we're making them, in terms of not making them simply because of social pressure, expectations, and to the extent that we help not just ourselves but others in the process, even in ways that we may not fully grasp in the moment. We are strengthening the muscles of emotional intelligence, or EQ, the self leadership that I talked about earlier, and strengthening our consciousness, as you mentioned, consciousness and access to the infinite source. And when making those decisions, we make them so that they have depth. They have depth personally and professionally. So if you're not afraid to tell yourself the truth, you will see all the ways you have been or done things simply to get along, simply to fit in, to people please, sometimes and often to your own detriment. So the key is to become more aware. Even if yours in a particular situation may be the other extreme to what I just mentioned, it's the realization that it's never too late to adjust and aim for greater balance, as the case might be. And so connecting, to the self, being aware of our decisions, and placing into context how everything sort of interconnect. Because as human beings, we're dual expression beings. There's the physical, obviously, you can see, touch, etc., sense, but there's also the spiritual aspect that needs to be part of that balance, part of that equation. I hope that answers your question, but I can also ask it in another way if it did not.
Meditation, and also self-awareness, and also other areas that can help us actually lead well. And awareness actually plays a very huge part when it comes to we actually trying our best not to be disconnected from ourselves. Because despite the pressures, despite the responsibility, we should always be in a position whereby we should know if we are actually keeping distance or if we are actually getting through the point whereby the disconnection with ourselves is actually coming from. And it's through the point of being aware of it and actually trying our best to see how we can mend that from the within and actually build upon our strength as well. I sincerely appreciate you for the wonderful insight, Mrs. Ufoma. Mrs. Ufoma, I would also like to drive to those who could be in the position to listen to our conversation and could be quietly longing to lead from a deeper place within. What would you want them to remember about spiritual growth, inner alignment, and becoming the kind of leader that the world truly needs? Mrs. Ufoma.
To remember first and foremost that it's very particular to each individual, and to not have it be complicated to matter or to be effective. What it means is, or what that means, I should say, is practices that affirm the spiritual and the spiritual quest of each individual body, mind, soul, spirit. Uh, Practically again, it looks like simply taking time to reflect, meditation, journaling, intentional affirmations that aim at wholeness, right? Not just a specific part of life. We all like things, we all appreciate our creature comforts, but wholeness, mental, emotional, spiritual, physical wholeness. Walking in nature, as I mentioned earlier, if you can't, just sitting outside and being mindful of what's around you, the clouds, the tree, the streets, the seemingly random animals you see are all teeming with life, right? The development part of your question, so like the spiritual growth of your question, is then fulfilled because we become more whole as we do this. We're in essence fulfilling our dual expression nature as humans, both the physical and the spiritual aspects. So the goal is to simplify, to be aware, to incorporate, to become, to go within, really lead ourselves, lead others, and then lead with soul.
remembering that we always have those attributes. Those will really play a very huge role with every decision we make, the action we take, and everything that we actually want to do to make our organization, ourselves, and also people that we actually lead and actually want to serve more better as well. And also, Mrs. Ufama, there is also a question I normally ask during the end of the show from our forefathers, from our ancestors. There are a lot of beautiful things that do exist during our forefathers' time that is missing in our time today. If there is anyone or anything you would like to bring back to our time today, Mrs. Oponma, what do you think that thing will be, Mrs. Oponma?
I would like to tie this to, you know, our sort of like notes and preparations before this call, where we talked about, you know, how do we know when outer leadership is sort of outpacing inner life, right? Because one thing we can say for sure is our ancestors, forefathers, foremothers were more connected in terms of their inner life. We're more connected to nature, uh, more spiritually grounded in more ways than we are to date. So I would say at this point, leading global's mission vision is needed because our leadership has become synonymous with management, and management has now become synonymous with sort of lead, leading and managing based on fear, ego, scarcity. There's almost that deeper spiritual grounding that's missing, right? Um, because when your title or your authority or position in a group dynamic means that no one should be able to question or speak up against your disrespect, that's a sign, right? That our outer leadership is outpacing that inner life. When people are walking on eggshells around you, when you're more sort of enamored with people fearing and fearing you and mistaking that for respect. Because in a nutshell, Tammy Top, that people can fear you and not genuinely respect you. The respect is simply performative. That's why you will feel its hollowness and observe the difference when someone genuinely likes and respects you, because it will be the least of all because of your title or your role or your position. Your soul, your spirit will sense it because it's, because of your being. It can sense it on that deeper level. So the more reason it's worth aligning with that inner self, that inner guide, that inner soul, that spirit. So you don't need the superficial, inauthentic yes people to have you feel like you're somebody. I don't know if that makes if that makes sense. The encouraging news is that there's always time to reset. There's always time to rethink, to reflect, to reorient. And we can borrow a cue from, as you mentioned, our ancestors, our forefathers, and a cue from nature too, because there are little absolutes with her. Just that relentless will to adapt, that courage to continue, that grace to keep on, regardless of the impact of all of our tremendous unconsciousness on her. Our souls, our spirits, and that of our forefathers, foremothers, or ancestors are made up of that zeal. So if we're willing to listen, go within and tap in versus overly being outwardly focused, we connect and reconnect with that. And it's for the best benefits of our higher selves.
Actually connects with ourselves and actually try our best to learn from our forefathers. It actually plays a very huge and profound role as well. And Mrs. Ofoma, I do agree with you with the point of communities because communities play a very huge role in everything we do, the decision we make, and how we can build our life as well. As a leader, building communities and actually leaving an impact for others. So actually groom ourselves and actually meditate to groom our energy plays a very huge role in every decision we make and everything we do as well. And I also want to use this opportunity to thank you for the time and the opportunity for us to have this profound and insightful conversation today. Thank you so much, Mrs. Ofoma.
It's been my absolute pleasure.
All right, Mrs. Ofoma. Have a wonderful day, Mrs. Ofoma. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye bye.